So first up, we have La Prima, and I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with La Prima. It actually was founded in 1988. Seems to me it's been around even longer, but it's originally as a business selling and servicing commercial espresso machine from their showroom in the Strip District. Now, of course, it's a full service espresso bar. It's where all the great Italians hang out, and it's an institution. It's there at 21st Street and Penn Avenue. And I'm going to introduce you to Sam Patty, who's going to take over. Sam?
Hi, how are you? Good morning. You ready for me to go?
We are ready for you to go, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Will there be questions after, or how does this all work?
Why don't we see how it's going? There's a chat room here. So if there are questions, maybe I can monitor the chat room.
That would be great. That would be great. Okay, very good. As you said, we started in 1988, and just real quickly, we're a small batch roaster. We're certified fair trade, certified organic. We're roast to order, and we love to sell coffee online. So that's a little, I guess I'm going to steal a little advertisement there. But my comments are really driven by a question that I receive on a pretty constant basis. And that is, somebody will come in and say, hey, I'd like to buy a coffee for a gift, and I'd like to have your best coffee. I never know what that means. And of course, that's like anything else. You know, what's the best apple? What's the best pizza? What's the best hot dog? How do you answer that question? And I think that it all boils down to taste profiles. What kinds of tastes do you expect? What kinds of tastes do you like? So what I'd like to do is just make a few comments on this idea of comparing coffee taste profiles, or how you can develop your own coffee taste profile, or at least understand it. And I wanted to make this real simple. And in terms of introductory comments, this is what I'd say. If you're going to make a good cup of coffee, there are a couple of things that you need. You need good coffee. But one of the problems we see is you need to use enough coffee. And we've seen over the years that if you go and look at restaurant frat packs where they brew coffee, sometimes they're brewing coffee with only 2 ounces to do a half gallon. That's not anywhere near enough. Here's the key. Here's the ratio. For every tablespoon of ground coffee, you include 4 ounces of water. So the ratio is 4 ounces of water to 1 tablespoon of ground coffee. That's a good beginning. That's a good baseline. And so you can judge where you want to be on that scale. That's the first thing. The other thing that's a little bit problematic is the water needs to be hot enough. And so you have to make sure that your brewer has enough wattage to give you the proper temperature. One of the advantages of brewing by hand, let's say a pour over or French press, is you can control the temperature of the water because you simply let the water come to a boil. When the water is off boil, in other words, when the bubbles disappear, you're at about 200 degrees. And that's the temperature you're looking at. Somewhere in the vicinity, give or take 3 degrees of 200 degrees is the proper temperature. So those things are pretty important. If you don't follow those kinds of dynamics, you're making it much more difficult to brew a good cup of coffee. Now, so starting from there, I'd like to talk about 4 ways that you can kind of help yourself define your personal coffee taste profile. And those 4 items are aroma, body, brightness, and taste. And I think this is real basic, and really you could walk into the door of La Prima or any other coffee shop in Pittsburgh and start talking about coffee and decide to pick a coffee from one shop and go and get the special coffee from another shop. And if you follow a comparison by comparing aroma, body, brightness, and taste, you can really develop for yourself a personal taste profile. So let's talk a little bit about aroma. I have a couple little props here. The first is I have some ground coffee. And so you want to smell the coffee before you brew it. And then after you brew your coffee, you want to smell it again. All right. And when you look for aroma, here are some of the areas that you're going to find. This is kind of like what the taste wheel would look like. What do you smell? Do you smell chocolate? Do you smell tobacco? Do you smell spices? Do you smell fruit? Specifically, do you smell some kind of a citrus, spices, nuts? These are the kinds of things that you would look for in terms of determining the kind of smell that you would like with your coffee. In other words, because obviously that smell is going to leach itself down into the taste. So the first thing is aroma. And again, aroma for the ground coffee itself and an aroma for the brewed coffee. What's kind of crazy is if you brew coffee and smell it, or even in this whole tasting process, the longer the longer you go, the smells themselves seem to change. But at least we can work with the initial aromas, the initial taste. So that's the first thing. What do you smell? And it's kind of funny. You don't really think about that, but if you had 3 or 4 different coffees in front of you and you smelled all 4, you would really notice the difference. It's like tasting wine. You say, well, gee, it's wine. But if you compare it to others, you can start to see differences or what really stands out in a specific beverage. The next dynamic is body. Some people like a thinner coffee. Some people like a thin coffee. And so body, like in wine, is very important to the whole taste profile. Now, the easiest way for me to explain that to you would be by using another expression called tongue feel. And we know this, we know this sensation because if you get a milkshake, you can get like just a regular milkshake, or you might say to the soda jerk, well, you know what? I'd really like to have a thick shake. And so we know the difference on our tongue between a regular milkshake, maybe a thinner milkshake, but certainly when somebody gives you a thick milkshake, you can taste that on your tongue. And coffee has the same sensation. Some are lighter in body, some are heavier in body, and you would have a preference. All right, so we have aroma, we have body. The next item is brightness. Now, brightness might be another word to substitute for acidity. The problem with using the word acidity is that when we think of a beverage and acidity, I think we think of like maybe an upset stomach or something that's very negative. In the case of coffee, when we talk about brightness, what we're really talking about is that same sensation that you would ascertain in drinking wine. Is the wine sweet? Is it on the sweet side, or is it on the tangy, dry side? So we talk about brightness in terms of either being very bright and tangy or being less bright. And again, we have our preferences. Maybe in the morning we'd like something a little softer, a little less bright. And as the day goes on, you want to maybe drink something that's a little tangy, just like wines. Dessert wines, aperitivo wines, then something after dinner that is maybe a little bit tartar. So you have this idea of brightness. And this is a big one. This is a big one. Finally, there's the conglomeration of all these items and what you would call the finality of the cup of coffee, and that would be taste. What's the overall sensation of drinking coffee? How does this coffee compare to the coffee that you usually drink? Is there something that's extremely offensive, something that you really, really like, something that when you go to buy a pound of coffee and you ask the person at the store, what's your best coffee? They might say, well, what do you like? You can say, well, I really like coffee that's nice and bright, or I like coffee that has a lot of body, or I like coffee that maybe smells citrusy or chocolatey, whatever the case might be. So this is a real general guideline, but I think it can give you some what I would call objective criteria to judge the coffee you're drinking. And I can say that over the years, we have had coffee tastings in our store. And my mantra is always this: look, we're going to taste some coffee. And by tasting other coffees and by comparing these 3 coffees with the coffee that you always drink, 2 things will happen, or one of 2 things will happen. Either you'll validate that, man, I really like the coffee that I drink and I don't want to change. Or you're going to say, gee, I didn't realize there were so many other taste profiles out there. I think I'll try something a little different and be a little more adventurous. And that's the whole idea of it. So the idea, I think, of evaluation is pretty important. Because it validates. And I think if you use these real basic criteria, even for the very first time you ever drink coffee, you'll have some kind of a guideline for yourself so that you can taste coffee and find one that you enjoy and pass it on to your friends. So that's the basic format of my conversation. Just try to understand what you're drinking, and here's some guidelines. All righty.
That's great, Sam. Thank you for that. It's inspiring. Now I want to try different coffee flavors. So I'm always stuck on bold blends. I really like a strong coffee. Can you explain to people the difference in caffeine levels between a
Well,
mild blend and a bold blend? Because it's surprising, isn't it?
well, well, I just went through all this stuff about coffee tasting, but it seems like more than anything else, the guideline that people use when they buy coffee is the degree of roast. So a lighter roast of coffee as opposed to a darker roast of coffee. Darker roasts of coffee have less caffeine because some of that caffeine is roasted out, and it changes the taste profile because you get a little bit of a tanginess. Some people, there are people out there that like steaks that are well done. And I would say that there's some kind of relationship between a well done steak and a darker roast. And so they like that little tanginess they get from the caramelization that goes into the darker roast. And I think that when we talk about that caramelization, we talk about I want a bold coffee or I want a strong coffee. And it's kind of paradoxical because we usually associate strong with caffeine, and the darker roast should basically have less caffeine because of the 400-degree roasting temperature.
That's right. And what about espresso?
Boy,
Where does that fit in that?
It's taken a lot of time, but I guess probably it's fair to say that espresso has been pretty popular in the United States for about 30 years. And we always used to associate espresso with really dark, burned, greasy coffee. That's not the case at all. Espressos can be light, they can be medium, and they can be dark. People would say that the elixir of coffee is the espresso because the brewing happens so quickly that you don't add too much water, or the brewing process doesn't take so long that it actually kills all the positive taste in the coffee. So that's the idea of the coffee. And I usually try to explain that espresso is kind of like drinking a Guinness. And a lot of people like Guinness. They mix it with other things, but it's that kind of bittersweet sensation that you get into with the espresso. And I think a lot of people like the creamy head. So those are some of the I think positive characteristics. And of course, the espresso goes pretty well, as we know, in milk drinks. And so you have a lot of choices with espresso. But after dinner, I mean, I think it's one of those dinner drinks because of the bitterness that really is pretty satisfying as an after dinner drink, as a digestivo to help you digest a great meal.
That's great. Another thing I'd like to mention, one of the questions that we got were someone wants to know about coffee places offering outdoor places to drink coffee right now, outdoor seating. And I would have to say La Prima has had outdoor seating throughout the entire pandemic. I know because I've been there often enough. It's been a great place to meet people because we can distance but still be outside and really feel like you're part of a scene. So you're continuing that, correct?
I can tell you that we started that. I think maybe there was one restaurant in town when we took our show outside. That was like almost 30 years ago. And I remember people saying, well, how are people going to sit outside? I mean, we're in the Northeast. And I said, why don't you take a little ride to Toronto and you'll find out, because they've always had outside seating up there. But absolutely. One of the things that I hope really sticks in this whole pandemic thing is I think the city has allowed restaurants, coffee bars, and whatever to go out into the street to actually take over parts of parking places. And in Europe, in Toronto, you see this all the time. Now, the business has to pay for that parking space if they're going to take it, which is fine. And I think people would really be willing to do that. And the outdoors it's really a nice extension. And so we have taken over the street, we have taken over the sidewalk, and we would love to continue to do that. And we're more than willing to pay for the rental of that property. And I think a lot of people are going to try to do that. It's kind of neat sitting out in the street. And it's kind of ironic that I think before the pandemic, if you would have asked the city, can I go out on the street? They would have, what are you, crazy? You can't do that. Well, you can do that. And it's done in a lot of places in the world. I'm kind of excited about that. So you can see that we need to continue that.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. It's just a really nice vibe down there. I enjoy going.
And all over
Thank
the
you
city,
so much.
sure. I mean, I think that vibe is, if you go to Oakland, they've taken over whole streets, just what we've had to do to get through this pandemic.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Sam. It was great having you here today. Really appreciate it.
All right. My pleasure. My pleasure.